In this episode, we will talk about a model which will help heart attack patients in remote rural areas get the required medical treatment. We also talk about Pegasus, the Israeli spyware, and its Indian victims. But first, we talk about the Supreme Court's ruling regarding the powers of a governor. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Back in 2023, the Tamil Nadu governor, RN Ravi, decided to withhold assent to 10 bills of the state assembly, escalating the ongoing tussle between him and the ruling DMK. Later, Tamil Nadu and 3 other opposition-ruled states had approached the Supreme Court seeking its intervention. Now, on Tuesday, in a major ruling, the Supreme Court set aside Governor Ravi's decision regarding the 10 bills, calling it illegal and erroneous. To understand the significance of this ruling and the limits it sets on a governor, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's legal affairs editor, Apurva Vishwanath.
Apurva, usually in opposition-ruled states, we see this tussle between the state government and the governor because the governor is appointed by the centre. Could you talk about how have we seen these tussles play out in the recent past?
The office of the governor has historically been used against opposition-ruled states, depending on whoever is in the center. When the Congress was in power at the center, especially during Indira Gandhi time, you've seen the office of governor being used to dismiss a lot of legitimately elected state governments using president's rule, right? Where the governor would, in his opinion, inform the president that there is a breakdown of law and order or constitutional machinery, and a president's rule would be imposed. This, however, also was stopped effectively by a Supreme Court ruling. The court sort of stepped in and said, it's not the subjective satisfaction of the governor, but there must be legitimate grounds and, these things were set aside. So the office of governor is at the end of the day an agent of the center. And when you recognize that, there's always going to be a tussle wherever, the ruling parties are not the same. So what we've seen in the last few years is, however, a different kind of or a different area of this tussle being played out. In the opposition-ruled states, currently, the issue was more legislative because on a lot of other areas, judgments of the Supreme Court have reined in the powers of Raj Bhavan or have at least circumscribed how these powers can be used. What you saw was a different kind of a power struggle.
And you mentioned president's rule, you mentioned legislative powers, but could you describe the full extent of a governor's role?
So the governor has a lot of crucial roles and duties also, right from the formation of a government in a state. The governor decides who should be invited to form the government. So there might be a single largest party, which we've seen sometimes BJP emerging as a single largest party, but 1 or 2 opposition parties form a post-poll alliance and they might have more numbers than the BJP. So then it is really about who the governor invites to form the government. After the government has been formed, the governor has powers, again, like we talked about, there are certain legislative powers, which is actually what the Supreme Court is looking into in the case of Tamil Nadu Governor RN Ravi. The governor grants assent to bills, just like the president does at the center. And until that stamp of approval comes from the governor, a bill is not made into law. Then, of course, president's rule is one area. The governor also has powers to grant pardons and decide mercy petitions. So there's a whole bunch of judicial power that the governor exercises. These other areas, which were relatively under the radar but are now becoming politically fraught, that is the governor's power to issue sanction for criminal prosecution. We've seen when the current Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar was in West Bengal as the governor, he granted sanction to initiate prosecution against TMC members, leaders in the Nanda chit fund scam. Again, right now, there is an issue in Karnataka where the governor, Thawarchand Gehlot, has issued sanction to prosecute the chief minister, Siddaramaiah. So this is like a new dimension of how the governor is using their powers. So there are a number of fault lines that can occur because of how vast the powers of the Raj Bhavan are actually.
And now the reason this matter reached the Supreme Court was, of course, because of legislative issues. Governor RN Ravi had withheld 10 bills of the Tamil Nadu Assembly. And during this time, we saw that 4 states, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Punjab, and Telangana, they had approached the Supreme Court seeking intervention. And we should mention that perhaps the reason why the governor had withheld the bills and didn't send them back was because if he had sent them back and the assembly cleared them again, then he would have been bound to give his assent. So he was basically just holding on to them. Now, what the Supreme Court did on Tuesday was that it withdrew that decision from him, essentially passing those 10 bills. Talk about how significant that decision was.
So, especially with RN Ravi, there are, quite a few conflicts with the Tamil Nadu government. You've seen him walk out of budget sessions saying that the national anthem was not sung or, some such thing. On these 10 bills particularly, I think one of the key issues that he had was one of the bills concerning universities actually replaces him as chancellor in certain universities. So that could have been one of the reasons why he withheld consent. But what happened is when, the constitutional scheme of things, Article 200 says that the governor has 3 options, either to grant assent, either to refuse, or to refer some bills to the president for consideration if it seems to affect, 1, 2, 3 reasons that are provided in the constitution. Ravi basically did none of those 3 things. He just sat on these bills. So the Tamil Nadu took this issue to the Supreme Court. And here is where it gets interesting because the Supreme Court also recognizes this, play of hand, because as soon as the case reached the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court intervened and made some strong observations, Ravi quickly referred these to the president. So in that sense, the governor is signaling that, they're no longer with me, but it is the remit of the president now and it's out of my hands. And the Supreme Court sort of recognizes this and says, because of this conduct, because of this trickery really, we will use our extraordinary powers and grant assent to these bills, which is actually a huge signal that the court is extremely unsatisfied with how the things were dealt with, right? So the court uses this very sparingly used power, but many feel that they use it way too much, but that's another story to discuss. This provision called Article 142, which grants the Supreme Court the power to pass any order, decree, to be able to do what we call quote-unquote complete justice.
Yeah, like in this case, it essentially took over the role of the governor.
Yes, in a sense, the courts, what it does is just take that whole power out of the hands of the governor for this case, right? Because that was what was being litigated. It's not going to happen in every future case. But even that is a big step. Normally, what a constitutional court would have done is told the governor, here now that we've decided, set time limits for you to, decide how you want to grant assent to bills. Now, in the light of our judgment, de novo take a call, which is take a call afresh, right? That is what the court would normally do. But using 142 powers is, 10 steps forward in that sense. So it sends out a strong message that the court is extremely unhappy about the partisan approach that governors are increasingly taking. And in fact, if you look at, the judgments from the last few years, the court has had a consistent line that the governor should not be stepping into the domain of an elected government. Ultimately, it is the assembly with the elected representatives who represent the will of the people, right? It is not the governor.
Yeah, and even though the center is involved in their appointment, the governor is supposed to be bipartisan.
Right. The center being involved in their appointment also does not indicate the will of the people, because the will of the people for the center is on a different level. It's not for the state, right? So in Tamil Nadu, nobody elected a BJP-ruled center and their appointee. So that's essentially what the court's line of reasoning has been. And, and this is one of the rare areas where the court has been pretty consistent from the 1970s onwards. So that the governor's powers have to be circumscribed, placed mostly under the aid and advice of the cabinet, and even discretionary powers have to be used in a fair and transparent manner.
Okay, so the Supreme Court gives assent to these bills, it takes over the governor's role. But one of the things that these 4 states wanted the court to do was that they wanted the court to also define the role of the governor, right? They wanted the court to decide what the governor can or cannot do. In what way does the court do that?
So the problem with taking the governor to court is actually something in our constitution again. Article 361 of the Constitution provides legal immunity to the governor's actions on most cases. In fact, if you see a lot of times when the court has to intervene and issue notice, they actually give it to the secretary of the governor or secretary of the Raj Bhavan or somebody else, not the governor himself. But this case again has been quite a turning point because here the court directly refers to RN Ravi. I think it's also because of the very strong defense that the governor's office also put up in court. Attorney General Venkatramani appeared for the governor and defended him in court. So that's where the court pushes the envelope and sort of agrees with the Tamil Nadu government that whatever the discretionary powers are of the governor, even if located within the constitution, they have to be exercised in a particular manner. Discretion doesn't mean you do arbitrary things, right? Even discretion has to be guided by the same principles of you exercise any other powers. But, if the Supreme Court has actually been quite wary of prescribing similar time limits for other constitutional offices. For example, another increasingly partisan role you see in politics and especially in lawmaking in states is the role of the Speaker of the House. Every time you see defections or, parties breaking, MLAs jumping ship, the 10th schedule becomes very important, which is our anti-defection law, which makes an MLA liable to be disqualified from the House, right? So the Speaker decides this. The constitutional power involving the 10th schedule lies with the Speaker. And you have seen how speakers just sit on these matters. And, like Maharashtra was a very good example that way. The court, even though it has passed these strictures against the speaker, has not really set timelines. They've said that the office of the speaker should not be partial and a whole bunch of things, but did not do this because it's one constitutional body to another constitutional body, which the court is always wary of, stepping into each other's domains. But I think with the governor's case, the way the Supreme Court has dealt this issue also shows that things have gone really bad.
And so do you think this case would have any bearing on these other roles, like the Speaker of the House, for example?
So it definitely sets a precedent. I mean, forget the speaker. Right now, there are cases involving other states like Kerala, which went to court against its former governor, Arif Mohammad Khan's decision again, that he was sitting on some bills, did not grant assent. So those are pending before court. Telangana has moved the court in a similar way. So at least for these immediate things, yes, this case will have a huge bearing. The fact that, the court has stepped in for one constitutional authority, it's very likely that it might do the same for the speaker as well. And interestingly, there is a study, this was published in one of the online portals, which looked at all the instances of president's rule before and after the Supreme Court's judgment, Rameshwar Prasad case. And the use of president's rule as a tool to dismiss governments dramatically fell after the Supreme Court's intervention. So Supreme Court judgments, that's one case actually which demonstrates that there's been a significant impact of the court ruling.
So does that mean that with this ruling, we are sort of unlikely to see instances where governors are withholding their assent to bills?
I would say even if there are instances where governors are withholding bills, states will be much faster in moving court and getting it done.
Next, we talk about patients suffering from a heart attack and the medical care that they require. Over the past few years, the incidence of heart attacks in the country has increased, particularly among younger individuals. What's also concerning is that many of these cases prove fatal despite the fact that timely medical assistance can save lives. Though unfortunately, not all hospitals or medical centers are equipped with the advanced technology or specialized personnel required to manage heart attack patients, especially in rural and remote regions. So to overcome this challenge, the Institute of Cardiology at Madras Medical College has implemented the hub and spoke model. The institute actually connected the smaller hospitals across the state to 18 large hospitals which have a cath lab facility.
It's essentially a laboratory where doctors can perform minimally invasive heart procedures.
That's the Indian Express's Anonna Dutt, who reports on health for the paper.
Especially, you must have heard about stenting. So that can be done in these labs. So 18 hospitals with these labs were connected to the smaller hospitals to ensure a better outcome for patients who have heart attack.
Now, what's important to note is that there are two kinds of heart attacks.
Like you must have heard doctors say, okay, someone had a major heart attack or somebody had a minor heart attack. So these are the two types of heart attacks. One is STEMI and one is non-STEMI heart attack. In STEMI heart attack or ST elevation myocardial infarction, which is the technical name, what happens is the blood flow to a part of the heart is entirely blocked. So that muscle does not receive any blood flow and starts dying. That is the major heart attack. A minor heart attack, there are clots, but the blockage is not complete like in a major one. So a major heart attack is much more likely to kill a person, or even, the muscle where the blood flow stops. Once the muscle dies, there is no way of reviving. So that is why procedures are needed to open up the blood flow as soon as possible and save the muscles so that the heart can remain in very good health.
Right. So, Anonna, in a situation like this, what course of action should be followed in order to save the patient, especially in the case of a major heart attack?
Right. So in the major heart attack, the focus has to be to immediately open up the blood flow to prevent muscle loss or permanent muscle death. So for that, there can be two ways of doing it. One is, of course, getting a stent in and restoring the blood flow as soon as possible. But that is a procedure which can be done only if a hospital has a cardiologist, has the lab facility that is needed to do the procedure, and which is not possible in a lot of places. Like you mentioned, if it happens in rural India, you wouldn't be able to immediately access a hospital that has the facility. Also, if you can access the hospital, it's an expensive procedure. It would cost anywhere around 1.5 to 8 lakh rupees, depending on the type of stent you're using and the type of facility that you're going to. The second option is to get what is known as a clot buster medicine called streptokinase. So if you give this medicine, it buys time for the patient. So you can give the medicine at a smaller center, and then you move them to a higher center, and that could even be a government center that performs these surgeries for free or at minimal cost, depending on the economic condition of the person. But what this giving this medicine does is it buys you time, and it gives you around 24 hours then to do the stenting procedure and restore complete blood flow. And it is known to have as good an effect as doing a primary stenting procedure.
Right. So coming back to the study by the Institute of Cardiology, what solution does it propose for a situation where a patient requires advanced medical services, such as a coronary angioplasty, but lives in a remote rural area where these services are not available?
Right. So the study was conducted in 2 phases, and what the doctors did was connect the cardiologists in these 18, like I mentioned, the 18 big hospitals to the doctors that are there in the smaller hospitals. So WhatsApp groups were created with each of these centers acting as a hub, and then the smaller centers acting as spokes. And what happened is, whenever a patient with heart attack would come into a smaller hospital, their test results, ECG result, as well as their patient history, all of that would be put on this WhatsApp group, where the cardiologist from the bigger hospital could take a look at the reports and inform the doctors in the smaller hospital whether this patient would benefit from getting that clot busting medicine. If they said yes, they would, then the clot busting medicine can be given at the smaller center before the patient being moved to the bigger hospital to get the surgical intervention.
And Anonna, tell us, what has the study revealed? What has been the success rate of this method? And can this model reduce the number of deaths that can occur due to heart attacks?
Right. So what the studies showed is that, once these smaller hospitals were connected, they were also much more likely to perform these revascularization procedures, or procedures that can restore blood flow. So if we look at the second cluster, which consisted of 6 of these hubs, and these were centers that did not even have the cath labs before the study began. So these were just centers that had cardiologists in them, and the cath labs were set up as part of the study. And in that cluster, the 6 clusters in the phase 2 of the study showed that the primary stenting procedure, that almost remained the same in the 5 years for which the data was collected between 2019 and 2023. But what happened is the procedure of giving them drugs and then moving them to higher center, that increased from 0.9% to 25.3% in 5 years. And that also translated to fewer people dying in these situations. So the proportion of deaths went down from 8.5% to 5.8%. So that is a significant improvement in the odds of surviving, which is what the study showed. So the two main findings were that, yes, connecting these centers through WhatsApp resulted in more procedures, and it also resulted in fewer deaths.
And Anonna, what do other medical experts have to say about this study and its findings? As in, can this model be applied to places beyond Tamil Nadu?
So the important thing here is that it has shown that connecting smaller hospitals can help in reducing the number of deaths. Now, this might not be possible for, say, a very large state like Uttar Pradesh or a state where there are very few cardiologists. In Tamil Nadu, they could implement the model like this because there were several hospitals which had cardiologists present. But even in such a setting, what can be done is these shots can be given. So the Tamil Nadu study looked at, like I mentioned, streptokinase as the clot-busting agent. And that has to be given as an infusion to the patient, which again requires some level of, consumables and doctors to be present at a setting. But even without that, what can be done is these newer injections that have emerged, which is just a one-shot jab that can be given to a patient, and then they can be moved. So these newer drugs can increase the odds of, more centers doing this intervention.
Okay, so while efforts are being made to make medical services more accessible to everyone who needs them, you mentioned earlier that the stent procedure can cost anywhere between 1.5 to 8 lakhs. So is expense just as accessible?
So the newer medicines are costlier, and therefore, in a government setting, it is not very commonly used. But again, what the experts who participated in this study said is that the price of these medicines can actually be brought down with government action, which was done even in the case of stents. Stents used to be very expensive, and then the prices were brought down. And with government, of course, the procurements usually happen in bulk, so that also sort of brings down the prices of medicines and consumables. So that is one method that was suggested could be implemented in places other than Tamil Nadu, where, distances between the hospital might be higher or fewer cardiologists may be present. But it would definitely even then help in reducing the number of deaths.
And in the end, we talk about the 1,223 victims targeted by Israeli spyware Pegasus in the 2019 WhatsApp hacking campaign. At least 100 of those 1,223 victims were located in India, according to a new legal filing published last week. The document is a part of the court's exhibits in a lawsuit filed by WhatsApp against the Pegasus maker, NSO Group Technologies, in the United States. The Israeli firm was accused by WhatsApp back in 2019 for infecting and surveilling the devices of around 1,400 victims, including human rights activists, journalists, and other members of civil society, by exploiting a security vulnerability in the popular instant messaging platform. While the Meta-owned company won the lawsuit in a landmark court ruling last year, the damages owed to WhatsApp by the NSO Group will reportedly be determined in an upcoming hearing. As a part of the hearing, WhatsApp reportedly submitted a chart titled Victim Country Count, which listed the number of individuals affected by Pegasus in each of these countries. It revealed that Pegasus targeted 1,223 WhatsApp users from 51 different countries in a span of just 2 months, that is from April to May 2019. First published by the Israeli news site CTEC, the majority of the people targeted by the Israeli spyware were in Mexico, and the total number was 456. India ranked second with 100 individuals targeted. Other countries included Bahrain with 82 individuals, Morocco with 69, Pakistan with 58, Indonesia with 54, Israel with 51, Spain with 21, the Netherlands with 11, Hungary with 8, France with 7, the United Kingdom with 2, and the United States with 1 targeted individual. In 2021, it was reported that Pegasus affected more than 300 Indian mobile numbers, including that of 2 serving ministers in the Narendra Modi government, as well as 3 opposition leaders, one constitutional authority, and several journalists and business people. One of the main reasons why Pegasus is so controversial is because the NSO group has said that the spyware is only sold to government agencies and law enforcement authorities. However, the 2021 Pegasus revelations published by a consortium of news organizations claimed that the spyware may have been used by governments around the world to target journalists, human rights activists, and political opponents. The number of victims also gives an insight on who NSO Group's highest paying customers were. According to a report published by the New York Times back in 2023, Mexico had reportedly spent around $60 million on Pegasus. TechCrunch said that the NSO Group has terminated contacts with 10 governments after it learned that they had abused Pegasus. The NSO Group was reportedly selling a one-year license to Pegasus for up to $6.8 million, which earned the spyware maker at least $31 million in revenue in 2019. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Niharika, Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.